This isn't Biden and Trump and Bush. This has been going on since the end of World War II. I've shown policy papers, memorandums from the 1960s talking about why the U.S. is bombing Vietnam. It is part of a long-standing policy of containing China. That was what it was always about. And before that, and if Carl was here, would have been really great because he could talk about how the U.S., along with Europe, had been in the process of colonizing China for a century, the century of humiliation. This is where they had occupied Chinese territory, and they were slowly transforming it into a divided colonial outpost for the West. And after World War II, these people were all expelled. The Communist Party of China expelled them. The People's Liberation Army expelled them. And then they began building up their country. And the West even knew at that time, in the 1960s, that China would eventually surpass them. They knew it was inevitable. They had been fighting to try to contain and reassert control over China ever since, for decades and decades. It is one single policy. If you read these memorandums from the 1960s, they sound like they could have been written yesterday because it's the exact same narrative. So the Biden administration's policies are just the continuation of this desperate desire to encircle and contain China. That is all that they've ever done. And President Xi Jinping was giving a speech. I forget which forum it was. It was all business leaders who got up and spoke before him. And Gina Raimondo also spoke. And they were all talking about how they want peaceful coexistence with China. And this, we can compete, but it doesn't have to be a conflict. But all while they're blowing this hot air, the U.S. has troops stationed on Taiwan, which the U.S. itself recognizes as Chinese territory. So they are provoking China in the worst way imaginable, violating its sovereignty, invading its territory, occupying its territory, which is, again, this whole issue over Taiwan is a continuation from the U.S. being expelled from the mainland and clinging to Taiwan as a foothold within Chinese territory to try to reassert control over China. So they're doing that right now. They're sending weapons and ammunition to Taiwan right now. They are deeply involved in political interference in Taiwan's local political system, the upcoming elections. Surely we don't expect those to be free and fair. They can't possibly be. Every aspect of the current administration and even political system in Taiwan is a creation of and a perpetuation of U.S. political interference there. Taiwan, as it exists today, could not exist without this constant U.S. support. We always hear people talk about Taiwan independence. There is no such thing as Taiwan independence. They are completely dependent on the U.S. right now. And if the U.S. just overnight cut its ties with the administration in Taiwan, they would be forced to reunify with China, which would be for the best interests of everyone in Taiwan. The most positive aspects of Taiwan right now stem from its significant economic relationship with the rest of China. And that would only stand to grow if they reunified with the rest of China. The fact that they're resisting this and forcing this separatist issue, this is actually hurting their economy, isolating them. And does anyone honestly believe that the United States could match the trade and the economic opportunities that the rest of China already offers Taiwan? Does anyone think the U.S. can offer an alternative from the other side of the Pacific Ocean? The answer is no. All they offer is military bases, military support, all toward a proxy war that will burn Taiwan to the ground, just like the U.S. is burning Ukraine to the ground. And if you actually read U.S. policy papers that war game a possible conflict with China over Taiwan, they admit that even if Taiwan is victorious, everything on the island is burned, all the infrastructure and industry is gone. And they don't mention what happens to the population because they couldn't care less. But I think we could all assume that they would also perish in that type of conflict. But hey, they would have their political independence, which is just code for it remains a U.S. foothold inside Chinese territory. And so when you understand that that is what the U.S. is doing right now, while talking to President Xi Jinping saying we can cooperate, we can compete. It doesn't have to be a conflict, but actually it does, because the U.S. is committed to a conflict. They are committed to containment, and they admit it at every opportunity, even as they blow us hot air when they're trying to appear diplomatic. And they try to appear diplomatic. This is the last thing I would say. They try to appear to be diplomatic because they want to convince the world that when hostilities begin, it was China's determination to be belligerent that caused hostilities. Because, hey, look, we tried diplomacy. We even invited President Xi Jinping to the United States, but he's just a dictator and he can't help himself. And the minute he got back to China, all he did was go right back to provoking conflict and threatening all of our military bases off their shores. I just shared, this was from a couple of months ago, but I think it was Sky News Australia. They did a short video presentation about China's growing aggression. They literally showed a map of China completely surrounded by U.S. military bases in Asia Pacific and in the Indo-Pacific. And they said China is increasingly aggressive towards these military bases. And it is them unironically repeating that meme where they say, look how bad China or Iran or Russia want war with the U.S. Look how close they put their country to our bases. That was basically the narrative that they were genuinely trying to push onto the public.
Yes, sorry. I was like, can we see this? Yes, this is the map that you were talking about.
China's aggression could start new world war. How dare they? Look at how close they are to all those American bases. This is literally the narrative that they were trying. 2.9 million views. Look at that. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's working. It's working.
Yeah, when I first went to China, the tour leader and friend, an activist, his name is Suhin. When we would go to like shops and stuff, and people would ask him, "Hey, is this like real jade?" He would look at it and he'd go, "That's fake. That's fake, fake, fake." Like he would just point, fake, 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 fake. Well, we have more than a half dozen, it seems like, instances of the United States making overtures to China, which have been proven over and over again as literally fake. It's like Blinken's visit, fake. Janet Yellen's visit, fake. Gina Raimondo's visit, fake. Yellen again, fake. All of it. And then, of course, Biden's visit. And, of course, I get, China is taking the high road, as they always do. They're looking to get on with what they want to be business as usual, which is a stable tie. So they're not letting this derail them, even if they did condemn it. But I like to play a game, and I'm sure you do this, Brian, in your research. Let's see what happens when you type China into Google and then go into the news section and see how good are relations right now. How does the media, which is a reflection of how the U.S. government thinks about things, how does the media talk about things right now? Well, here's James Palmer over at Foreign Policy, formerly owned by the Washington Post Graham Holdings Group. This isn't a honeymoon phase for the U.S. and China. They've merely agreed to a cessation of hostilities. So essentially almost like a so-called ceasefire. And then I want to keep going with this. There's a few other articles here. This is from the Wall Street Journal. During the APEC summit, U.S. executives get no reassurances from Xi on tougher China business environment. Lamenting over, so what business leaders were lamenting over there was that Xi Jinping did not acknowledge at all how insufferable China's political system and regulations and leadership has gotten over U.S. investment. And then we can keep going. Washington Post, a growing global footprint for China's space program is worrying the Pentagon. So that's not it. We're going to go one more. And because I think this is especially important to what you've been talking about lately, Brian, here you have The U.S. and the Philippines are conducting joint air sea patrols of the South China Sea, not far from Taiwan. So over and over and over again, the media is basically indicating that this diplomacy seems fake. So Brian, your reaction?
Well, again, China is rising and it is surpassing the West. Right now, as we speak, it is surpassing the West in a growing list of metrics, and this is irreversible. The United States especially has absolutely no possible way to even keep up with China, let alone rebalance this in their own favor. Doesn't even make sense to try when you really think about it. The US has 300 something million people. That is their population. China has 1.4 billion people. So there's the same population as the US plus over 1 billion people. Just think about that. How do you imagine a country with 1.4 billion people versus your 300 something million with modern infrastructure, a excellent education system, pumping out millions more in essential, relevant fields like science, technology, engineering, mathematics, fields that actually build the physical world around us and design and build your economic and military power. How do you think you're going to prevent them from surpassing you? It's impossible. It doesn't even make sense to try. And I always go back to it would be like Portugal having a mental meltdown because the United States is more powerful for them. I mean, I think people in Portugal just accept the reality that we are a small country. We had our time many years ago, and this is where we are today, and we should just be happy with what we have. We should have a solid relationship with as many different countries as possible, trade, and just try to find the best life possible for the people who live within our borders, mind our own business. If the Portuguese even do that, I don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe there is still some delusion there. But this is the United States. This is what the U.S. needs to do. They need to adopt this mindset where they are not ever going to be as big or as powerful as China. They need to accept that they're going to be second and eventually someday third. Because if India ever does manage to organize themselves and move past the colonial legacy left so generously by the British, if they're able to get past that, they will be a second global power above the United States. And so the U.S. has to get used to this, but they can't because the current circles of interest are just like that racist bully we saw at the very beginning of your live stream, Danny. They can't accept that. These people in their mind are inferior. And if you've ever met someone who is hopelessly racist, this is the end of their universe when they see someone who is smarter than them, bigger and stronger than them, doing something better than they can do it. Their whole reality starts falling apart. And when you're a group, a circle of interest with access to nuclear weapons and global spanning power, that becomes extremely dangerous because it's not just some insecure racist going to jail for harassing a food vendor. You're a nuclear armed superpower burning countries to the ground because you can't accept reality. And that is basically where we are. And I think China fully understands this. If you listen to Xi Jinping's speech, President Xi Jinping's speech, he did not talk about containing, confronting, so even surpassing the United States. As a matter of fact, he said, we're not interested in surpassing the United States. We're doing our thing. You do your thing. And we could work together. We could do all of these things together. And that's that. And that has been the Chinese position. You never hear them talking about going to war with the United States or anything like that. They just say, leave us alone. And that includes Taiwan. And again, and I have to repeat this every time we bring Taiwan up, go to the U.S. State Department's own official webpage on U.S.-Taiwan relations. They admit that they don't recognize or support Taiwan independence. It is part of China under the U.S. One China policy. People have to keep that in mind. They're playing this double game where they recognize Taiwan as Chinese territory, all while undermining China's sovereignty, which, if it were the other way around, would have instantly provoked a war. The U.S. would never tolerate that even for a minute.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. And, to your point about the just inevitability of the United States becoming number two to China, Well, there's also fissures in the United States' attempt to strangle China, like similar to what happened to Russia is happening with China, but I think even with more substantial blowback. You have an article in Bloomberg talking about how Huawei's chipmaker turned U.S. sanctions into a success story, talking about the Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation in the mainland. In this article, it talks about not only how it makes advanced chips and how it's been able to subvert sanctions, but it says that it was able to hire Taiwan executives and engineers to oversee expansion as it competed with Taiwan's chipmaker, which arguably you could say benefits both Taiwan's authorities and the mainland because they're competing with each other and getting better and better. There really is no lose, but you have talks about the restrictions that the United States attempted to enact on this company, but it's not enough. They talk about loopholes and U.S. regulations hitting chip making firms immediately, but it took months to win over Japan and the Dutch, and that there hasn't been enthusiasm over this, and that the fallout over the fact that, well, maybe perhaps the world isn't as enthusiastic about these sanctions on technology that basically the entire world needs if it's going to keep up technologically is just it's a foregone conclusion. Like you can sanction Huawei, you can do whatever you want to Huawei, but China has still found a way to come out of this. So much so that when Gina Raimondo came back from her visit, she was shocked that that Huawei was able to release the Huawei Mate Pro 60, which had these advanced chips.
Which is funny because I was just going to say, if you've been to China, I've been to China. If you've been to China and you're actually looking with your eyes open, you can see that there's nothing else like this anywhere on earth. It is just the scale of absolutely everything is, you have to see it to believe it. And the industrial capacity of China is unprecedented. It's the largest industrial base on planet Earth in human history. And as President Xi Jinping said, China's economy is not a pond. Then you throw one rock into it and it disrupts everything. It is an ocean. You throw a rock in it, no one's even going to notice. And hasn't that played out exactly in terms of attempts by the U.S. to put sanctions on China and to strangle its technological development? This is the U.S. throwing rocks into the ocean and no one noticing, or someone saying, what is that guy doing over there? And you just talked about U.S. officials going to China and coming back, and they're surprised because they didn't open their eyes when they were there, because they have this idea that China is inferior, and that's just a given. They don't need to look because it's just a part of reality. It's just like the sky is blue. I don't need to look up to tell you. But in reality, China is a completely different place than how they perceive it. And I've experienced this when I was in the Marines. And I see so many people say this too when they try to appeal to their own authority. Like, I was in Japan for a year, and it's not like that, Brian. But you were in Japan for a year. You were on a U.S. military base. You might go outside the gate to the little town that caters just to people coming out of the base that locals don't want to go. And that is your whole perception of Japan, which is completely distorted from what Japan is actually really like. And so this is what U.S. officials do when they go to China and on these trips. They're not really opening their eyes and seeing China for what it is. They're just selectively looking at things that reinforce their bias, their delusions of what China is. So there's that. And again, I just mentioned how China is graduating millions more in fields like science, technology, engineering, mathematics. These are all relevant to something like semiconductor manufacturing. And then, we hear about this tension between Taiwan and the rest of China. But there are, I forget how many people from Taiwan actually live and work on the mainland. And that number is set to grow. China has instituted policies in Fujian, right, the province facing across the strait from Taiwan. They've opened up areas where people from Taiwan can go and actually own property and pursue work and business there. And then there's the fact you mentioned Japan is not happy. South Korea is not happy with this attempt to strangle Chinese semiconductor technology and production, because despite the appearance, the narrative that Japan and South Korea are American allies against evil China, both Japan and South Korea's largest trade partner is China, and that is their largest market for their own chip production. And they even have facilities in China that augments their chip industries. And when the US says we have to cut China off, that means cutting South Korea and Japan off. And it's the exact same thing the US has done to Europe regarding Russia. You're cutting them off and you're killing their economy. Their economy is connected to Russia because they're right there next to Russia. It makes sense. South Korea and Japan are right there next to China. It makes sense that they're the biggest trade partners, and you're artificially going in there and distorting everything. And what you're doing is you're going to implode all of these economies that are working with China. And again, you cannot isolate a country that has 1.4 billion people, world-class infrastructure, and one of the best education systems on earth. You can't do it. It's impossible. So they should just stop trying, but they're clearly they're not going to.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.